Have you ever felt like you're speaking perfect English, but somehow everyone's looking at you like you just recited ancient hieroglyphics backward? Yeah, welcome to the daily life of an INFJ. What's up, everyone? Today we're cracking open one of the biggest mysteries in the personality world. Why INFJs, despite being some of the most caring and thoughtful people you'll ever meet, somehow manage to leave everyone around them utterly baffled. And the wildest part? They have absolutely no clue they're doing it. Now look, if you're an INFJ, don't click away just yet. This isn't about roasting you or making you feel bad. This is actually about understanding why the world finds you so puzzling when you're just out here trying to live your life. Think of this as your, oh, that's why people react that way moment. And if you're not an INFJ but you've got one in your orbit, maybe it's your partner, your best friend, or that coworker who's simultaneously the most helpful and most mysterious person you know, stick around. Because by the time we're done here, their seemingly random behavior is going to start clicking into place like the world's weirdest puzzle. So grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and let's dive into the beautifully confusing world of the INFJ personality. Trust me, this is going to be good. 1. The social butterfly who vanishes into thin air. Okay, picture this scene. Last Saturday, your INFJ friend was absolutely electric at the party. They're having deep conversations, remembering everyone's names, making people laugh, and genuinely connecting with folks left and right. You're thinking, wow, they're really coming out of their shell. Maybe we should hang out more often. Then Monday rolls around. You text them. Nothing. Tuesday you call. Straight to voicemail. Wednesday you're wondering if they got abducted by aliens. By Friday you're starting to think you somehow offended them. 2 weeks later they pop back up like, hey, sorry, been busy. Want to grab coffee? What? Here's the thing that nobody tells you about INFJs. They're not actually extroverts playing at being introverts. They're introverts who've become absolute masters at wearing an extrovert costume. And that costume is heavy. After a night of socializing, even a night they thoroughly enjoyed, an INFJ doesn't just need a break. They need to basically hibernate and rebuild their entire sense of self. See, when an INFJ's in social mode, they're not just participating in conversations. They're reading the room's emotional temperature, picking up on everyone's unspoken feelings, adjusting their energy to make others comfortable, and basically running a dozen social calculations per second. It's like they're playing 4D chess while everyone else is playing checkers. So when they disappear afterward, it's not personal. It's survival. Their brain's exhausted from all that emotional labor, and they need to cocoon themselves in solitude just to feel like a person again. The confusing part? They don't think to explain this. In their mind, it's obvious they need space. To everyone else, it looks like they're playing hide and seek with the relationship. 2. The mind reader who answers questions from an alternate dimension. You. Hey, where do you want to eat tonight? INFJ, well, I've noticed you've been really stressed with work lately, and you mentioned last Tuesday that you wanted to try eating healthier, but I also remember you saying comfort food helps you relax. Plus, it's raining and rainy weather always makes you crave soup, doesn't it? So maybe we should find somewhere with both healthy options and good comfort food? Unless you'd rather just stay in? You seem tired. Are you sleeping okay? Because if you're not sleeping well, we should probably do something low-key tonight. You. I just asked where you want to eat. Welcome to the INFJ's superpower/curse. They can't just hear your actual words. Nope, that would be too simple. They're simultaneously processing your tone, your facial expression, your recent behavior patterns, that thing you mentioned 3 months ago, and somehow calculating what you really need in this moment, which may or may not have anything to do with your actual question. Their intuition works like a supercomputer that's always running in the background, connecting dots that don't even seem to exist yet. So when you ask a simple question, their brain doesn't respond to the surface-level query. It responds to the entire context they've built around you, your current situation, and what they believe would genuinely serve you best. The absolutely bonkers part? They think they're being helpful. They genuinely believe they're giving you a thoughtful, thorough answer. They don't realize that sometimes people just want to know if they prefer tacos or burgers. They're out here trying to solve your entire life situation when all you wanted was a simple dinner suggestion. And honestly, this wouldn't be so confusing if they did it occasionally, but they do it all the time. Every simple question becomes a philosophical exploration, and people are left wondering why this person can't just give a straight answer. 3. The vault who knows all your secrets. Let me paint you a picture of a typical INFJ friendship. They know your childhood pet's name was Mr. Whiskers. They remember that story you told about your embarrassing middle school phase. They know you're scared of disappointing your mom, and they picked up on your anxiety about that work presentation before you even mentioned it. They've basically become a walking encyclopedia of you. Now flip the script. What do you know about them? They like coffee? They're from somewhere? They have a job doing things? After 6 months of friendship, you suddenly realize you could write a biography about yourself through their eyes, but you couldn't fill out a basic questionnaire about them. What in the world? Here's the deal. INFJs are natural collectors of information about people. They're genuinely fascinated by what makes you tick. They remember details because those details matter to them. Understanding you is how they show love and care. It's their language of connection. But opening up about themselves? That's like asking them to dismantle their protective fortress brick by brick. They've got emotional Fort Knox built around their inner world, complete with multiple security checkpoints and a moat filled with small talk and deflection tactics. Why though? Because INFJs have usually been burned before. They've shared their depth with people who couldn't handle it, who called them too intense or too much. So they learn to keep the vault locked unless someone proves they're genuinely safe. And even then, they reveal things in tiny fragments, testing the waters at each step. The confusing part is they don't see themselves as closed off. Because in their head, they're constantly thinking about themselves, analyzing their feelings and processing their experiences. So when someone points out that they never share anything, the INFJ's genuinely confused because they feel like they're always sharing. They just forget that sharing happens inside their head, not out loud. For the dreamer who's never actually happy with reality, you know what's wild about INFJs? They'll be your biggest cheerleader. They'll hype up your work, support your wildest dreams, and genuinely believe in your potential even when you don't believe in yourself. They see the best in everyone around them. But themselves? Oh boy. They could win a Nobel Prize and still think, yeah, but I could have done it better. They're like those video game players who beat the final boss but still aren't satisfied because they didn't get a perfect score. People find this incredibly confusing because it seems like a massive double standard. The INFJ will tell you that your painting is beautiful, but they'll redo their own painting 17 times because it's not quite right. They'll praise your work presentation while simultaneously convinced their own presentation was a disaster, even though everyone else thought it was brilliant. Here's what's happening in that complex INFJ brain. They've got this crystal clear vision of their ideal self. It's not just about being successful or accomplished. It's about being the best possible version of themselves, making the deepest possible impact, and living up to their full potential. That vision is vivid, detailed, and honestly, probably impossible to fully achieve because it's based on perfection. Every single day, they're measuring their current reality against this ideal vision, and reality always falls short. Always. It doesn't matter how much they achieve or improve. The gap between where they are and where they think they should be feels massive. The kicker? They don't hold anyone else to this standard, just themselves. So when people try to compliment them or celebrate their wins, INFJs genuinely can't see what the fuss is about. They're too busy noticing the 17 ways they didn't measure up to their own impossible standards. To everyone else, this looks like false modesty or fishing for more praise. But really, they just exist in a permanent state of, I should be doing more. 5. The feeling-based decision maker disguised as a logic machine. Here's a scenario that happens all the time. An INFJ gets offered an amazing job. Better salary, impressive title, great benefits, corner office, the whole package. Everyone around them is like, obviously you're taking this, right? And the INFJ's like, actually no. Everyone's confused, so they ask why. And the INFJ launches into this incredibly logical explanation about company culture fit, long-term career trajectory, work-life balance concerns, and team dynamics. They've got data points, they've done research, they sound completely rational. But here's the secret. None of that is actually why they said no. The real reason? Their gut screamed, this isn't it. Their intuition picked up on something during the interview that felt off. Maybe it was the way the CEO answered a question, maybe it was the vibe in the office, or maybe it was something they can't even name. But something inside them went, nope. The thing is, INFJs learned a long time ago that it doesn't feel right isn't an acceptable answer in our logic-obsessed world. People want reasons, data, concrete explanations. So INFJs have become incredibly skilled at reverse engineering logical justifications for decisions that were actually made on pure intuition. And here's where it gets even more interesting. They often convince themselves that they really did make the decision logically. They forget that the feeling came first and the logic came later. So 6 months down the line, when their intuition turns out to be dead-on accurate and that company implodes or gets exposed for toxic culture, the INFJ can't even explain how they knew. They just did. This drives people absolutely crazy because you can't argue with their logic, but something about the decision still feels off to everyone else. The math doesn't quite add up, but you can't pinpoint why. That's because the real equation was emotional and intuitive, not logical at all. 6. The emotional sponge who needs to wring themselves out constantly. Everyone knows INFJs are empathetic. That's like their calling card, right? They're the ones who notice when you're having a bad day before you've said a single word. They're the friends who check in on you when you're going through it. They feel deeply, they care genuinely, and they're always there for emotional support. So riddle me this: if they love people so much and they're so empathetic, why do they need to be alone so much? Why are they constantly turning down invitations, screening calls, and acting like social interaction is physically painful? Seems contradictory, doesn't it? But here's what's really going on. For an INFJ, empathy isn't just a nice personality trait they can turn on and off. It's more like being an emotional sponge that soaks up everyone's feelings without meaning to. You're stressed? They feel it. Your coworker's anxious? They absorbed it. The barista having a bad day? Yep, they picked that up too. Now imagine going through your day collecting emotional residue from every single person you encounter. By the end of the day, an INFJ isn't just carrying their own emotional load, they're carrying fragments of everyone else's feelings too. It's like finishing a workout covered in sweat, except the sweat is other people's emotions, and you can't just take a shower to wash it off. That's why they need alone time. It's not that they don't like you or don't want to hang out. They need space to process and release all that emotional data they unconsciously collected. They need time to separate what's theirs from what belongs to others. They need silence to quiet the emotional noise. But do they explain this? No. They just say, "I'm tired," or "I need some me time," which doesn't even come close to capturing what's really happening. So people are left thinking, but we were having fun. Why do they want to leave? They don't get that having fun and being emotionally drained aren't mutually exclusive for an INFJ. 7. The philosopher who can't actually explain philosophy. INFJs spend an honestly ridiculous amount of time living in their heads. We're talking hours of deep contemplation about life, meaning, patterns, connections, and ideas that span across multiple fields of thought. Their minds are like these intricate spider webs connecting everything to everything else. But then someone asks, "Hey, what are you thinking about?" And the INFJ completely freezes like a deer in headlights. "Oh, nothing really. Just zoning out." Liar. You were absolutely not zoning out. You were contemplating the connection between a childhood memory, quantum physics, human nature, and why breakfast cereal is arranged the way it is in grocery stores. But can you explain that web of thoughts out loud? Absolutely not. Here's the problem: INFJ thinking isn't linear. They don't think in neat, organized bullet points that translate well to spoken language. Their thoughts are more like, imagine a complex map where everything connects to everything else in ways that make perfect sense when you're looking at the whole picture, but if you try to describe it to someone else, you'd have to spend 3 hours explaining every single connection, and even then they probably still wouldn't get it. So instead of even attempting to explain, the INFJ just doesn't. They say nothing or give some oversimplified version that doesn't remotely capture what was actually happening in their brain. This makes them seem mysterious, secretive, or like they're hiding something. But they're not being secretive on purpose. They're just trapped inside their own complex thought patterns without a good translation system. It's like they're thinking in a language that doesn't have a direct English equivalent, so any translation feels inadequate and frustrating. The result? People think INFJs are either empty-headed space cadets, definitely not true, or deliberately withholding their thoughts, also not true. The reality is they're bursting with thoughts but paralyzed by the impossibility of explaining them coherently. 8. The prophet who can't show their work. You know what really freaks people out? When an INFJ casually mentions, "I don't think this is going to work out," about a relationship, a business deal, or a situation, and everyone else is like, "What are you talking about? Everything's fine." Then, 3 months later, things crash and burn exactly how the INFJ predicted. And everyone's standing in the rubble like, "How did you know?" The INFJ shrugs. "I just had a feeling." That's not an answer, though. But here's the thing. It's the only answer they've got. They can't break down their prediction into a PowerPoint presentation with supporting evidence. They can't point to specific red flags that anyone else would recognize. Their intuition picked up on patterns, inconsistencies, and subtle signals that their conscious mind didn't even register, processed all of it in the background, and delivered a conclusion without showing any of the work. It's like they have a supercomputer running complex calculations behind the scenes, but they only get the final result, not the formula that got them there. So when people ask how they knew, they literally cannot explain it. They just knew. This makes people deeply uncomfortable. Some folks start thinking the INFJ is psychic or has some supernatural ability. Others think the INFJ is just pessimistic and happened to be right this time. Some even get paranoid, thinking the INFJ somehow caused the predicted outcome by speaking it into existence. But none of that is true. The INFJ's intuition is just highly developed from years of pattern recognition and people reading. It's a skill, not magic. The confusing part is that even the INFJ doesn't fully understand how they do it, so they definitely can't explain it to anyone else. And yeah, sometimes they're wrong. Their intuition isn't a perfect crystal ball. But they're right often enough that people start to expect these prophetic insights, which puts weird pressure on the INFJ to perform their prediction party trick on demand. 9. The caretaker who refuses care. INFJs will show up at your door with homemade soup when you're sick, even though you didn't ask. They'll remember your important meetings and check in on how they went. They'll notice you're struggling and offer help before you even realize you need it. They're basically emotional ninjas who swoop in with support at exactly the right moment. But when they need help, good luck. They'll struggle alone, convince themselves they should be able to handle everything independently, and only reach out when things have progressed from struggling to actively drowning. And even then, they'll probably say something like, "I'm fine just dealing with some stuff," which is INFJ code for, "I'm absolutely not fine, but I refuse to burden anyone with my problems." Why is this so confusing? Because it creates this weird one-sided dynamic where everyone else feels like they're constantly receiving from the INFJ but never giving back. People want to help, but the INFJ won't let them. It feels unbalanced and frustrating. But in the INFJ's mind, there's this deep-seated belief that their value comes from being the helper, not the helped. They've often had experiences where their needs were ignored or minimized, so they learn to just handle everything themselves rather than risk being disappointed. There's also this fear that if they need too much, people will decide they're too much work and leave. Plus, and this is crucial, INFJs have such specific visions of how things should be done that they often think it's legitimately easier to just do everything themselves rather than explain what they need and potentially have someone do it wrong. They don't realize that this self-sufficiency doesn't make them strong. It makes them exhausted and disconnected. People who care about INFJs find this behavior absolutely maddening. They can see the INFJ struggling, they want to help, but the INFJ has Fort Knox-level defenses around accepting support. It's confusing and painful to watch someone you care about refuse the same help they freely give to everyone else. 10. The disappearing act that's never about you, but feels like it is. We talked about INFJs needing alone time, but let's get real specific about the ghosting thing because this one causes the most relationship confusion. An INFJ will be super present in your life. You're texting regularly, hanging out, having great conversations. Everything seems solid. Then boom, radio silence. Messages go unread, calls go unanswered, and they've basically evaporated from existence. Days turn into weeks. You're cycling through every possible explanation. Did I say something wrong? Are they mad at me? Did they meet new friends and forget about me? Are they okay? Then, just when you're about to send a wellness check, they resurface like nothing happened. Hey, sorry, been swamped. Want to catch up. And they're ready to pick up exactly where things left off, as if that gap never existed. Excuse me, what? Here's the truth bomb. When an INFJ ghosts, it's almost never about you personally. They're dealing with something internal that they can't articulate, don't want to burden you with, or honestly might not even fully understand themselves. Maybe they're processing some heavy emotional stuff. Maybe they're overwhelmed by life and don't have the energy for external relationships. Maybe they're in a funk and don't want to drag anyone down with their mood. Whatever the reason, they retreat into their inner world to sort it out. And in that inner world, they lose track of external time. Days feel like hours in there. They think they've only been gone briefly when it's actually been weeks. The extra confusing part? They can still show up for other people during this time. You might see them helping a mutual friend or being active in some capacity, which makes you think, wait, they have energy for that but not for me? But that's not what's happening. They're compartmentalizing. They can show up for someone else's crisis while simultaneously ghosting their own life. They don't mean to hurt anyone. They just get so consumed by their internal processing that they genuinely forget people on the outside might be worried or confused. Then when they emerge, they're shocked to find out people thought something was wrong. In their mind, they were just taking a normal recharge break. 11. The wise oracle who questions everything they know. INFJs drop wisdom bombs like it's their job. They'll give you insights about yourself that are so accurate it's almost creepy. They understand people's motivations, see patterns in behavior, and can often predict how situations will unfold. Their observations are usually spot on and incredibly valuable. But internally, they're second-guessing literally everything. They'll have a strong intuitive hit about something, but then their brain immediately goes, wait, but what if I'm wrong? What if I'm projecting? What if I'm reading too much into this? Maybe I'm just being paranoid? They'll share an insight but preface it with 17 disclaimers. This might be way off base, but you probably already know this, but maybe I'm totally wrong, but why is this confusing? Because confident people usually aren't right all the time, and people who are right all the time usually aren't this unsure of themselves. The combination doesn't make sense. But here's what's really going on. INFJs know things in a way that doesn't fit traditional standards of knowledge. They can't point to a specific source or piece of evidence for their insights. They just know. And in a world that values facts, data, and logical reasoning, intuitive knowing gets dismissed as guessing or being overly emotional. Most INFJs have had countless experiences where they shared an intuition and were told they were wrong, only to be proven right later. But by then, nobody remembers they originally called it. Or they've been labeled too sensitive, or reading too much into things, so many times that they've learned to doubt their own perceptions. So even though their intuition is usually accurate, they've been conditioned to question it. They trust it enough to share it, but not enough to stand firmly behind it. This makes them seem uncertain or like they're fishing for validation, when really, they're just trying to navigate a world that doesn't recognize intuition as a valid way of knowing things. 12. The volcano disguised as a still pond. Here's the final plot twist about INFJs. Inside, they're experiencing everything at maximum intensity. They feel deeply, think intensely, and care passionately about their beliefs and values. Their inner world is like a constant thunderstorm of thoughts, feelings, and sensory experiences. But outside, they look calm, composed, maybe even a little detached or aloof. They've mastered the art of keeping their intensity locked down where nobody can see it. This creates a bizarre situation where someone can know an INFJ for years and still have no idea how intense they actually are. Then one day the INFJ mentions something they're passionate about, and suddenly this volcano of emotion and intensity erupts, and everyone's like, who are you and what happened to the calm person we knew? Why do they hide their intensity? Because they've learned that showing their full self overwhelms people. They've been told they're too much, or too intense, enough times that they've learned to keep the volcano dormant in public. They control their expressions, moderate their voice, and carefully ration how much of their true feelings they show. The problem is this creates really confusing relationship dynamics. Romantic partners might feel like the INFJ isn't that into them because they're not gushing or being obviously affectionate, when really the INFJ is experiencing love so intensely it's almost painful, they're just not showing it externally. Friends might think the INFJ doesn't care about a cause or issue because they seem unbothered, when really they're burning with passion inside but processing internally before speaking up. Then occasionally the mask slips. The intensity breaks through. And everyone's completely caught off guard because it's such a stark contrast to the calm exterior they're used to seeing. This can make INFJs seem unpredictable or like they have two different personalities, when really, it's just the rare moments when the outside finally matches the inside. Conclusion. Alright, let's bring this home. We just walked through 12 ways INFJs leave everyone around them scratching their heads in confusion. From their vanishing acts to their prophetic intuitions, from their emotional sponge tendencies to their volcano disguised as pond energy, INFJs are walking paradoxes that can seem impossible to figure out. But here's what you need to understand. None of this is intentional. INFJs aren't trying to be mysterious or confusing. They're not playing mind games or deliberately keeping people at arm's length. They're just operating from a completely different framework than most people, and that framework doesn't always translate smoothly to the external world. All of these confusing behaviors stem from the same core traits: incredibly powerful intuition, deep emotional sensitivity, complex inner worlds, and a tendency to process everything internally before sharing externally. These traits make INFJs amazing friends, partners, and humans. But they also make them confusing as heck to the people around them. If you're an INFJ watching this, take a breath. You're not broken, you're not too much, and you're not doing anything wrong. But maybe, just maybe, it's worth working on communicating your needs and processes a little more clearly. You don't have to change who you are, but helping people understand you better will make your relationship stronger and less confusing for everyone involved. And if you're not an INFJ but you've got one in your life, hopefully this video gave you the decoder ring you needed. When they disappear, they're recharging, not rejecting you. When they seem closed off, they're protecting themselves, not shutting you out. When they make decisions that don't make logical sense, their intuition's probably picking up on something real. The key to understanding INFJs is recognizing that their inner world is infinitely more complex than what they show on the surface. What you see is maybe 10% of what's actually happening inside them. Once you accept that and stop expecting them to operate like everyone else, their behavior starts making a lot more sense. INFJs might be confusing, but they're also some of the most loyal, insightful, and caring people you'll ever meet. They see you in ways most people can't. They remember details that matter. They show up when it counts. And once you figure out how to speak their language, the relationship becomes incredibly rich and rewarding. So that's it for today's deep dive into the wonderfully weird world of the INFJ. If this resonated with you, smash that like button and subscribe for more content about personality types and human behavior. Drop a comment and let me know. Are you an INFJ who just had 17 that's why moments? Or are you someone who finally understands that confusing INFJ in your life? I want to hear your stories. Thanks for hanging out with me today. Remember, being confusing doesn't make you broken. Sometimes it just means you're operating on a level most people aren't used to. Keep being your authentic self, even if that self leaves people scratching their heads sometimes. Catch you in the next one.